Educational GMAT. Your partner in your GMAT journey.
Tricky one, guys, tricky one. Now, can someone quickly, before you go through this, can you quickly tell me who is the author of this argument? Who is the author of this argument?
The historian.
Yes. And the reason I'm stressing on this is we discussed this in reading comprehension, and that would be my message here also, that there may be 100 opinions of 100 people in the argument, but the main idea, in this case, the main conclusion would be whatever the historian is trying to prove. Right? Remember, same thing we discussed in reading comprehension also. That's the reason I have been stressing in reading comprehension that you have to keep a tab on where the author is merely citing someone else's opinion versus where the author is coming into picture for the first time. Because the main idea of the passage would also be what the author is trying to say. Similarly, the main idea of this argument would be what the historian is trying to say. Okay, now go through this. See, the reason this becomes complex is because many different sides and opinions are being expressed here. Okay, can someone tell me what is the traditional viewpoint that Newton and Leibniz, did they independently develop the concepts or was Leibniz influenced by Newton? What is the traditional viewpoint?
Independent.
Independent, correct? So Newton and Leibniz, Newton and Leibniz were independent. Notice here, it has traditionally been thought that these discoveries were independent. Okay. What do scholars think? Scholars.
That it is not independent.
Very nice. Scholars believe that Leibniz was influenced by Newton. Notice several scholars, right? Scholars are saying that it is virtually certain that the traditional view is false. This is what the scholars believe, that Leibniz was influenced by Newton. All right. Now, my question to you, what does the historian believe?
That we should not conclude that the traditional view is false.
Very nice. So, which means the historian is saying that Newton and Leibniz were independent.
Independent.
Right? Okay. Now, in line with this, now let us go through the argument. First thing, obviously, the main conclusion. What do you think is the main conclusion? Remember again, the main conclusion would be what the historian is trying to say, because historian, she happens to be the author of this argument, right? And remember, the main conclusion would always be what the author is trying to say. So what do you which line do you identify as the main conclusion in this argument? Which line, which sentence?
A more cautious conclusion than this is
Very
called for.
nice. Right? Again, I will quickly go through this. Notice scholars are saying that the traditional view is false, right? Scholars are saying that traditional view is false, which means scholars are saying that Leibniz was influenced by Newton. And this is where the author, in this case, the historian, draws the main conclusion that this is not true. In other words, a more cautious conclusion than this. Than what? Traditional view is false, is called for. So this is the main conclusion. Main conclusion. All right. Next, what do we do, friends?
First bold face.
Identify the role. Very nice. The first boldface. In fact, forget about premise and conclusion. Let's see if that's a fact or an opinion. All right. First boldface, guys. Fact or an opinion?
Fact.
It's a fact. It's a fact, right? So that's a fact. Let's put it as fact. All right. Is that supporting or opposing the main conclusion?
Opposing.
Opposing. Opposing the main conclusion. Again, why is it opposing? Because notice, based upon this fact, actually the scholars are concluding that traditional view is false. Right? Based upon this fact, the scholars are concluding that traditional view is false. But then the author clearly disagrees with that, right? So clearly the first fact, in fact, if you look at it, is presented to support the scholars, right? But then this is opposing the main conclusion. All right. Okay. How about second boldface? Is that a fact
Yes.
or an opinion?
Fact.
Fact, definitely a fact. And it is obviously supporting or
Support.
opposing the main conclusion? Obviously supporting,
Supporting.
right? So, all right. Any fact supporting the main conclusion obviously acts as a premise, right? So now with this information, that is when we look at the answer choices. So do keep this in mind. We have a traditional viewpoint, scholar's viewpoint, and then finally the historian's viewpoint. Okay, let's look at alpha. Can someone quickly tell me why is alpha incorrect?
Because it is saying that first is supporting the historian's viewpoint,
Yes,
but it is
supporting.
not.
Now notice, yes, it is opposing, right? So gone. Uh, Notice now this is exactly the same
Same.
as in alpha, right? So this is obviously gone as well. Okay, let's look at Charlie. The first provides evidence. All right, evidence seems okay. Remember, evidences are facts. This is a fact. Uh, wow. Okay, Charlie seems quite long. Let's skip it right now. Okay, let's look at David. The first is evidence that has been used to support a conclusion that the historian criticizes. So this seems okay. Evidence is a fact and the historian obviously is criticizing slash opposing it. Okay. Second is evidence. All right. Again, looks okay. Evidence is a fact offered in support of the historian's own position. So this seems okay, right? David seems okay. Okay, let's look at Edward. Now notice this is exactly the same as in David, right? So this is obviously okay. Let's look at the second part. Further information that substantiates the evidence. Notice the second is not substantiating the evidence, second is substantiating the conclusion itself, right? And so That brings us with David as answer. Charlie is something that we've not discussed so far. I actually chose to ignore it and come to it later because this seems quite complex. Let's look at Charlie. First, provides evidence in support of an intermediate conclusion that is drawn. Notice intermediate conclusion is this one, right? So, okay, that is drawn to provide can someone tell me why is Charlie wrong? Notice till this point it was correct, right? But then what does the overall, right? Notice what is it saying? The intermediate conclusion provides support for the overall position that the historian defends. No, historian is not defending this intermediate conclusion. Historian is against, opposing this intermediate conclusion. Notice this intermediate conclusion and the author's viewpoint are contradictory to each other, right? So the historian is not defending this uh, intermediate conclusion, or it's not provided in support of an intermediate conclusion that is drawn to provide support for the, basically this intermediate conclusion does not support the overall position of the historian, right? This intermediate conclusion opposes the overall position of the author. Intermediate conclusion is expressing the scholar's viewpoint, while historian is against that, right? So historian is not defending this.